Hello and welcome to another edition of Focus on Lakeville. I'm Jeff Leaders. We've all heard the old saying that there's only two guarantees in life, death and taxes. The history of taxes is not very interesting, so we thought we'd take a look at the White family who's been dealing with death as part of a family business for many generations. So in today's history moment, we take a look back at the White Funeral Home.
My grandfather, Daniel Gephardt, was born in Pennsylvania, and he came over to this area to farm, actually. They bought a farm, well, it's a Hauer farm. It's still in existence here, about a mile south of Lakeville. And he found out that farming wasn't his thing to do. He just didn't enjoy it, and he wasn't good at it either. So he bought a little mercantile store in Lakeville and opened it like a general store in 1895. And then he got interested in the funeral business. He went, there was an embalmer at Farmington at the time, and he went over and he worked with him for a while. Then you didn't have to go to school. If you worked with someone, you got the okay from the health department and they let you do the embalming. And so in 1895, he started to take in clients in the funeral business. And there was a fellow in town, George Kerr. They're still active in town, some of the Kerrs. And he made coffins. This is a long time ago. This is around the turn of the 1900. And so he started the funeral business. This is the way it was. A lot of the funeral homes years ago, furniture and funeral directing kind of mixed. There was a lot of combination businesses. But he wasn't in it long because he died young. He died when he was 50. He was born in 1865. And he died in 1915. Dan Gephardt had some sons, and one of his sons, Lenz, took over the funeral business. And then he started to expand the furniture business. And he ran it and enlarged the furniture store, but the furniture store was the dominant business at the time. In 1936, he sold the business, Len did, sold the business in 1936 to a Wilbur Zimmer. At the time, my dad was traveling on the road, working somewhat for Gephardt's in the furniture business, and selling furniture and mattresses on the road. My mother was Len Gephardt's sister, and my dad worked at the store. And so what he did is married the boss's daughter, actually. And that's the way we got involved in the funeral business. But my dad's health was never any good. He had tuberculosis 3 or 4 times, broke down when he was young at about 20, and then again when he was about 25, and then in 1945 he broke down again. He had to go to the sanitarium. Then they isolated all the tuberculosis patients, and there was a sanitarium down in Cannon Falls, which he spent a year or 2 there. And he had a pneumothorax, which is they just collapsed the lung. They took the whole side, all of his ribs right out. And they collapsed the lung. So in 1945, he was in bed. So there's nothing for, still had his funeral director's license, embalmer's license. And so he decided to start a funeral home. So he started the funeral home in the back street of Lakeville in my grandma Gephardt's house. And then in about 1959, he bought out Zimmer's. And I've been around funeral service all my life. And my dad used to take me out, and we used to drive around. He'd look and he'd say, out by Credit River, he'd say, you see up in that corner bedroom up there? I embalmed a body up there. But then they embalmed in the house. In other words, when somebody died, they were at home, generally at home. So what my grandfather, Dan Gephardt, at the time had a sleigh, and he'd go out and he'd bring his paraphernalia. They used to call it a cooling board. They laid them on a board, and everything, all their chemicals, there was no running water and no electricity. My dad used to say, he said, the thing about it, when they called you out in the wintertime, the first thing the people would do when somebody died in a bedroom was open all the windows. So you'd be out there and it would be freezing. And so it was hard embalming. And then we didn't have, when my dad had a funeral, vaults. Now you have to have vaults in cemeteries because of the maintenance really on the cemetery. And they're nice, vault, and the settling of the grave too. It eliminates the sinking of the grave. But I used to go out during a funeral, before a funeral, when they have rough boxes. We didn't have the vault companies then to set up all the vaults and the paraphernalia and the tents and the chairs and the lowering devices. We used to have to go out before the funeral and set those up in a wood box, and then come back, change clothes, go to the funeral, And then after the funeral, we went back and took the lowering device and everything back to the funeral home to use the next time, because there was a lot of work to it, especially in the winter. You know, it was cold out there, and I did a lot of it, and the visitations were a lot in the home. My dad and I used to go out and used to have all the paraphernalia, go out and set that up in the house. And then we'd bring chairs and prayer rails and candlesticks and to hold the body in the casket and set it up in the home for 2 days. Then you'd have to be around there too. And the thing used to be kind of comical. Not it wasn't comical, but in the farms there was a lot of flies. My dad used to have to always, I remember the net he had to put over the caskets. People coming in and out, they had to keep the flies off the body. So he always had nets over the, generally had nets over the viewing of the body. This is a tough business. I love it, but it's a tough business. My mother used to say, it is, Jim, it's a tough business. You deal with people that are the lowest part of their life every day. I mean, when I was in the furniture business, Len Gephardt used to tell me, he said, they coming in this store, sell them something because they want to be here. Sell them something. People that walk through this door don't want to be here. This is the last place on earth they want to be. And so you've got to work with that. And they're as low as they're ever going to get. Generally, they are. So what you're doing, you're working with people that are in a real sad state 24 hours a day. And the reason that's nice to have funeral homes, and all of them have multiple places, is that when I was started in Farmington, I bought a co-op out in Farmington in 1961 when I started. I did about 10 funerals the first year. Now we're doing quite a few more. But I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we did the biggest thing about the funeral business, I think, is the beepers, the pagers. My dad, when he was in the funeral business, we had the operator across the street that did this switchboard in town. He'd call the switchboard and tell her, there was a woman, Mrs. Dunn, where he was going to be so she could contact him. But with the pagers, I had to call home. My wife knew every minute where I was, because every time I changed locations, I had to call home, because I didn't have anybody working. I never knew what Saturday or Sunday were. Every day was the same, because we worked some Wednesday we'd be off. If we were busy, we worked all the time. So we did a lot. I did a lot of the. Now it's getting back to that, because when you've got 4 or 5 people working, then they switch. We take turns. In other words, these boys now are on one weekend, off a weekend. They're on every other night. So that we have somebody on call all the time. So we're lucky we have enough staff around here to cover. But years ago, these small town funeral homes were just, they didn't have any staff. They couldn't afford to hire anybody. Now that the cell phones, I know some funeral homes that are a small town, but they carry the cell phone right with them. And so they can take calls any place they want. But that wasn't the case 25, 30, 40 years ago. So actually it started out as Gephardt's. For a few years, when Len sold out, my dad wasn't around to buy it out. He sold it to Zimmer's. They had a jewelry store too, and they built the building, a storefront down in downtown Lakeville. When my dad bought them out, he had the building downtown. Then he built this place. We just needed more room, and Gephardt's wanted that building to enlarge this center. Then they created that shopping center downtown. So in 1961, I was working for him. And then in about 73, he decided he wanted to get out. It was just too much for him. He was getting old. So I bought it from him. So then I ran both places myself. But he wouldn't sell it to me until I hired a man, because he didn't want me to run it alone. He said it was too much. So I hired a guy, and then we've had the embalmers here ever since. And then when Mike got out of school, he was the first one out of the U. He got out of school. All of them worked out first. They did their internship someplace else. My dad used to say he wouldn't hire me when I got out of school. He said, you go and make your mistakes with somebody else. That's what he always told me. But then the boys did too. But they went out and did their internships. Then all 3 of them came back. Mike worked in St. Paul. John worked in Minneapolis. And Jimmy did his internship in Alaska. And then they came back here, and now they're working here, which is nice. It's a family business. I had owned property in Apple Valley for years, but I couldn't get a permit. So finally I bought a piece of property on Pennock Avenue, got that, and then we built that there. Because we had to do more business, because we had the 3 boys here, and there wasn't enough business for 4 families out of these 2 places. And then I bought out Lonsdale, which was and I built a building there. And then we bought Burnsville from a big conglomerate Service Corporation International, which was really going broke. And so we bought that, Burnsville, from them. So it worked out real well for us because now we're clustered fairly close. And we're not running, there's not a big distance between the funeral homes. And that'll be about where we're going to sit for a while.